Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I was asked to create a tutorial to show how I transition from black and white to color like this. So before I dive into today's tutorial, I'm going to demonstrate again why you need this method and if you actually do need it. So have you ever seen artists paint on the internet or social media? They just start painting and the color is correct, the drawing is correct, and everything is correct in the same location. It seems like the painting magically just appear. Well, 90% of us don't paint like this, and for the rest of us, we actually split our process into multiple steps so that it's easier for us to compile and process a painting. So the first step is usually the drawing or the sketch, where we do all our planning. So we get all the proportions and the perspective correct, and we also plan where everything is going to be, what size they're going to be, and all the other composition related problems. Then after that comes the painting. The painting is actually split into three components: the values, which is how light or how dark it is, and then we have color, which is what color the patch has, and then we have chroma. Chroma basically means how gray the swatch is. So here is gray, and then to the other side is vibrant. So it really depends on what you're drawing or painting on that day, because if you are doing something very simple like an apple that you have done many times, you can actually just compile all these steps into one and save time. But if you're doing something complex or new for the first time, this is what we actually do. We would do the drawing and then we will isolate the values out, and then the next step we would do the color and the chroma together to complete the painting. Once you're done with your painting, you will actually arrive at a point where your painting requires some sort of breakthrough. So for me, in this painting, as an example, this is how the stage looks like. So it actually presents itself as a problem and you need to solve it. Either you need to add details or solve problems of proportions, of colors, of values, of the whole design in general. And if you manage to realize the problem and solve it, you will achieve some sort of a breakthrough, either just like an epiphany, or you achieve the painting result that you want. And for me, this was how the epiphany looks like. So this is what I call the breakthrough process, and it is the last step of any painting. So today I'm going to show you how to turn grayscale into color in the painting process, and then also how to solve problems during the last step as well. Alright, now let's get started with the tutorial. So the first thing that you would have is, of course, your sketch. So once you have your sketch, make sure you also throw in a gray for the layer below it so that we can get started. Now make a new layer above this one, and then just grab a gray, any gray, and then use any brush that you like. Just create a shape that encompasses the entire mass of subject. This is what I have for my first shape, and then the next step is to create a notan. So a notan is actually a black and white study of just two values, and through this notan you can actually tell what's in the painting. So if you have completed your notan and it doesn't look like anything, then you've got it wrong. So you need to at least make sure that it's very apparent what you're drawing. Like for example, this one has the jug, the human, and then the table is very visible in the design of the notan. So this also means that you don't have to follow the values exactly as your reference, because as an artist, your goal is to simplify or to make sure your subject matter stand out. So for my notan, it ended up looking like this. It's separated into two layers, and from this design itself, you can tell that she has curly hair, there's a kiss mark on her shoulder, and her posture is very visible. Also, the values is different from the reference. A trick on how to get your notan automatically is to use the curves tool and bring the left and right nodes closer together. So depending on where you put them, this will determine like how dark or how bright or where your shape is. So you should find a shape that clearly distinguishes the pose and the objects in the scene. But if you see here, no matter how I adjust, it just doesn't look distinguishable. So in this case, as an artist, you should actually just design it yourself and make sure your notan is more distinguishable compared to the one in the photo. So now all you have to do is fill in variations of values inside each shape. So you have two shapes, right? Like for example, this darker notan here, inside has these 4 smaller values. And then for this highlight notan shape, it has these 2 more lighter values. And then when you take out the sketch, they actually look correct and everything looks whole. And if you notice from the reference and my painting, the values are slightly different. Like for example, the hair here is a lot brighter in the reference, but there's none of that here. So as an artist, if you're going through this black and white to color process, you actually get to decide the value design. So this is actually a first option for how you're going to do your grayscale, which is you organize your layers based on values. Like I have a dark value here, and within it there are subtle changes of values inside this shape. And then we also have the highlight shape where there is a subtle changes of values within that shape as well. So the second option is actually to group your layers based on objects instead of values. For example, this is a skin layer, and then I have the kiss mark, and then also her top. And lastly, I have her hair in a separate layer. So I would recommend that if you have a very complex painting, you divide them according to values. And if you have a painting that is very specific in terms of colors for different objects, you can divide them according to objects instead. So now I'm going to start sharing coloring methods on how to turn your grayscale into color. So the first method uses adjustments. I'm going to demonstrate this on the object layers so that it's easier for us to see. So the first step is to create a new layer, set it to color blending mode, and then make sure that clipping mask is on. So you're going to color the layer below it this way. Okay. So now just paint any color. I'm just picking any skin color and coloring the entire skin first. You don't have to be accurate for this process, just drop in one color. Repeat this for every single layer and just drop in your estimated color first. You don't have to worry if your color is correct at this point, trust me. Once you're done, you can analyze what you have in front of you. So the problem is that it looks dead and chalky. The shadows looks very gray. So the reason is there are no color temperature changes. There need to be color temperature changes as it goes to highlights and in shadows. So to adjust this, you need to merge your color with your grayscale layer. So I'm going to duplicate another set for demonstration. So just merge the color with the grayscale layer. So once you have merged your layers, you will have your muddy color layers. Now head over to adjustments and click on color balance. And once you get into these two, you can see a tiny icon on the right. And if you tap on that, you will see shadows, midtones, and highlights. We are going to have to adjust the colors for shadows first. So for color balance, usually we adjust the left and the right colors first, which is the cyan red and yellow blue. And if everything goes well, we leave the middle one alone. But if something goes wrong, then we adjust the magenta and the green. Alright, now for the shadows, usually it goes a bit red for the skin. And then you can just try and push the sliders around and try and get it to be as close as possible to the reference. For midtones, usually the highlights goes towards yellow, but this is for natural lighting. So if your reference is looking a little bit different, just try and match it as close as possible. You can see that if I use the magenta green slider, it gets a bit retro or unnatural. So try to get things done with the left and the right sliders first before touching the center one. So just repeat this step for every single layer first and get the color temperature to look correct. I'm adjusting the kiss mark here for now. And then after that, for the bra, I can tell that something is not right. It's like too bright. So if something don't feel right, don't worry. Like for now, I'm just trying to get the color correct first and worry about everything else later. And now for the hair, I've applied a yellow, and by adjusting it, I realized that it's more ricey red instead of yellow. So it's what your initial assumption of the color, it doesn't really matter because you can just adjust it here using the color balance. Okay, I'm just going to apply more adjustments to the bra. So I'm going to use hue, saturation, and brightness this time. I'm going to adjust the saturation to be lower so that it matches the saturation in this reference. You can also use curves from the Adjustments tab to adjust how dark or how bright the layer or object is. But for now, I am going to leave these layers as is so that I can solve this as a problem and demonstrate them for you later on. So once you have reached this stage looking like this, you would actually be in the breakthrough stage already and you're going to have to solve problems. So this is how it looks like in the breakthrough stage for this method. Now on to the next method. This method requires the use of the gradient map. So using the object layer again, I'm going to pick the skin, go over to gradient map, and then what do we have here? We have a very funky gradient. This black gets mapped to your blacks in your value, and then this yellow here gets mapped to your white in your values. So going from left to right is dark to light in your values. But because I do not have any black and white in my painting, so you only see blue, pink and oranges in this gradient map. But you can see that if I push the black and the yellow towards the center, the black and yellow start to appear in the artwork. So this is another method on how you can color your grayscale, but it's a bit risky because just by pushing colors into each other, I can actually change the value. So this might destroy your value plan. Like I specifically wanted a very low contrast value design, so I shouldn't do anything to destroy that plan. So if you're using gradient map, just be careful not to destroy your value design that you have intended earlier. Also, if you realize if you flip colors or values to the other way, you are basically inverting the whole values itself. So any colors that you assign your gradient map have an inherent value, and that needs to match the values in your design already. So in a way, you're not only applying color and chroma to your assigned values, you are applying values as well. So be very careful when you're using gradient map. This can be a double-edged sword. But for now, if you know what you're doing, you can definitely use this tool to its advantage. Right now, I am trying to get colors that match my skin tone. Gradient map is very useful and easy if you are thinking of changing color designs. Like if I want blue shadows, like this, it is very possible and you can just design any color combinations that you want. But for now, I'm just looking to match the natural color based on the reference. So I'm just going to pick colors and see if they match. If you want exact matches, you can actually pick colors and dump them into a palette first before assigning them. That way you can get the most accurate results. So this is what I have. I have something that is much higher in contrast compared to my initial value design, just to show that gradient map is capable of doing this. And now I'm going to assign this step and repeat for every single layer. Remember the problem we had with the bra? In gradient map, I can easily just flip the colors around to solve the problem. So I'm flipping red towards the shadow so that it merges with the hand, and having blue as the highlights instead. Whether you're using the gradient map tool or the adjustment tools, like the color balance ones in the first method, you still need to have observational skills so that you can tell the relationships between colors and what colors to use for which part. Okay, now I'm done, and you can tell that the output from the gradient map method differs a lot from the first method earlier on. So depending on what method you choose to use, it also makes a difference on how difficult or easy your process is in the breakthrough stage. And now the last method. This is the method that I use usually, and I'm going to demonstrate it on the hair layer. So to do this method, you just make a new layer, set it to color blending mode, and then make sure it has the clipping mask on. The advantage of this method is that you can use any brush that you like, so I just pick any color and then I start painting. So this would actually deposit color and chroma onto the values without changing the values. I'm currently using the stacking skin palette to drop in the colors. You can use this or the easy skin palette. So the first step is to drop in an enveloping gradient first. But the downside of this method is that it's very difficult to target certain values because the layers have already been merged into object-oriented categorization. So like for example, I cannot just target just this value with the color that I want. So if you want to use this method, make sure that your layers are organized by values instead of objects. So one more thing before I proceed, if you see here, our painting is actually very different from the values of the original artwork. So if yours is different as well, you will not be able to pick colors from the original reference and dump it into your painting thinking that it will look correct. Because your value design is already different, the color relationships is also different. So you will actually have to figure out the colors that you have to use on your own. So now I'm going to demonstrate how to color this manually. So based on the reference, just try and see which areas are cool in color and which areas are warm. So for my reference, the cool is on top and the warm is at the bottom. So we have to replicate the same color transition. So we are going to turn everything off except for the true notan shapes first. Make a new layer above the background and use any brush to drop a color in for the background. Make sure you set this layer to color blending mode so that you are keeping the values for the background. Now let's just create a new layer above your shadow notan layer and then set this to color and clipping mask. Now just drop in your colors but maintain the color relationship. It can be any color but as long as above is cool and below is warm. So here is a fire red at the bottom and on top is a gray red for the cool version. Then after that, I'm going to put in some yellows and burning oranges at the edges just to match the reference a little bit. I can also test other colors such as purples and blues to get the temperature to be cooler on top and see how things looks like. Now I'm going to go over to the light notan, make a new layer, set it to color and also clipping mask, and then I'm going to drop my colors in. So same thing again, I'm following the color relationship. I'm going to give it a flash color first, and on top to make it colder, I'm going to put in pink first and see how it looks like. Pink is a bit ambiguous. It can be warmer depending on what kind of pink it is. Just to make sure, I'm going to drop some blues on top. Then after that, I'll drop in the high chroma colors so that it's more saturated and vibrant. When I'm satisfied with the colors, I use this as a base and then I will turn on all the other layers and repeat the steps all over again. So I will usually just put in a color first and see how it looks like. If it looks gray, then it needs to be more vibrant, and I'll adjust the color temperature from there. I usually take a long time here because I want to test all possibilities and get the right color relationships, and then I also want to see what I can stylize from here onwards. I usually like to use very vibrant colors for my shadows, so especially at the terminator areas, you see this edge just bridging the darkest and the lightest shapes. I would use a very vibrant color for these. Then I'll get to the highlight layers and finish those. Once I'm done, I usually adjust the entire chroma and saturation. And I'll also see if I want to adjust the contrast as well. So this is what I have at the end. Alright, so now I have 3 sets of portraits, the one with the values, and then the gradient map one, and also lastly the adjustment tools one that we did initially. So regardless of what method you use, the ways to solve the problems in the breakthrough stage is the same. So back to the portrait that was done using the adjustment tools, let's look at the problems here. So one of the problems that we have is that the color doesn't really flow. So I'm going to go to one of the affected layers, which is the skin layer, and then I'm going to go to my brush pack, the Portrait 2022 brush pack, and then look for the change color only brush. Make sure you turn on alpha lock for the layer that you're editing. Pick the affected color, in this case it's blue, and slowly fade out towards outside. So you have to use a very light touch so that you don't overpaint it. You can also do this on the other affected layers and this might have a better result. For example, in my case, it was actually better to do it on the bra layer. So I'm actually cooling down the colors in this area a little bit just by using a light touch and see how it looks like. Using the change color only brush, you can also use it to recolor certain parts of the portrait. For example, the eyes, you can start to assign it a color. Because the layer was colored uniformly previously, you have to add in all these details during this stage. I'm using the stacking skin palette, but if I want a more vibrant color, I go to the picker here and I push it towards the right to get a more vibrant color. So a question that I get asked a lot is, how do I know what colors to use? That's like asking me what's the colors of every single phone booth that I have not seen before in the world. So there's no way I would know, and the best answer I can give you is that you have to look at your reference. So if you think it's gray, you paint gray. If you think it's blue, you paint blue. And if you don't know, you just pick the color and see. So like for example, I pick here and then it's grayish orange, and you know that this is a very gray color, so you can try to use this color. But if you're trying to build your own color, you don't have to follow this, you just have to follow the color temperature changes. But here's a very universal tip that everyone uses. Make a new layer above the layer that you're targeting. Set it to clipping mask, and I'm going to use the dry square brush from my impasto brush pack. I'm going to paint a very exaggerated version of the gradient of the color temperature that I see in my reference. So on top is cold, right, and at the bottom is warm. So I'm going to paint a very exaggerated gradient of that. When you're done, just blend it and then set it to multiply mode, and then adjust the opacity until you like it. So this actually unifies the color a lot and gives it a subtle gradient. If multiply is making your artwork too dark, you can use other blending modes like screen or soft light. And here I'm adding a gradient to the bottom to unify and to darken that area a little bit. If you have organized your layers according to values, one additional method that you can use is you can actually individually adjust each value. Like I can just easily make these highlights brighter using curves. But a trick on how to get good highlights is to just paint it in the original color. Like I'm just painting yellow over these parts, and then I'm going to set the blending mode to divide. This actually kind of flips the color and make it brighter at the same time. So after that, you can just adjust the shape to become your highlights shape. So here I'm trying to get the same glow on top of her head with the same technique. So using the noisy spray brush, I'm just spraying the same color on top, but on divide blending mode. I'll just give the edges a good cleanup before I lower the opacity of this layer down. After you're done with all your colors and drawing, it's good to apply all the special effects. So now I'm using Gaussian blur in pencil mode, and I'm just going to paint the areas that are blurred. Then I'm going to head into noise, and then using the pencil, I'm going to paint some noise on the top as well. In the same divide layer, I can use the texture brush to paint in some highlights. In the same layer, I'm using a natural sketch and smudge brush in a very small size, and I'm just going to paint all the highlights in. If you want a quicker brush to do hair in this method, you can use the hair waves brush from the Procreate 2022 brush pack. So I'm using this brush to add in all the strands that are sharp. These sharp lines will stand out nicely against the blur background. And thank you so much for watching. This is how it looks like at the end of the day, and I'll see you in my next session. Bye!